Okay, Bashan,
Present.
Reynoldsson,
Present.
Belmeth,
Here.
Fleischman,
Here.
Hamilton,
Present.
Hartston,
Here.
Iglesias,
Here.
Kirkmeyer,
Here.
Gray,
Here.
Olvera,
Here.
Shining,
Here, and I apologize, I'm gonna have to cut in and out. I have another meeting on the 5th Tuesday, but I'll be here as best I can.
Sarush,
Here.
Spyro,
Here.
Torres Ambris,
Present.
and Judge Yu.
Here, thanks so much.
Sure. So we have a full complement of committee members, of working group members here today.
And Chris, do you want to announce or introduce our newest working group member?
Yeah, we have a new public member, right?
Yes.
Yes. Claudia Torres Ambris from DF Mexico. So, bienvenidos. And if you want to maybe just to introduce yourself and say a few words, that'd be great.
Thank you. I very much look forward to learning from you all and being a part of this process. I do live here in Los Angeles. I'm a fine artist. I'm also a teaching artist. That's what I usually do with my time, but I'm so happy to share some of that with you all. And again, be a part of something that I think is very useful and well-timed. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Linda, what does our public comment look like? Do we have?
I think you're muted right now.
We haven't called for public comment. We have a couple of hands raised, but if you want to officially, if anybody is interested in making comment, and I don't know, Chris, if you wanted to provide some guidance for what we're going to do with public comment or before we get started.
Well, I think if there's only a few public comment, we should probably take it now so we could get into the questions in the presentation. How many hands do you have right now?
We have so far we have 2 hands raised. So if there are any members of the public who are here as attendees who are interested in making a comment, in the bottom left of in the bottom center of your screen, you'll see you can raise your hand. If you raise your hand, we can get a count of how many people we are interested in making public comment. As of now, we have just 2.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and take public comment now, and we'll give each person like 3 minutes.
Okay. The first person is Jenny Miara. I'm going to allow you to talk, and as soon as your microphone is muted, as soon as you unmute your microphone, you can begin speaking for 3 minutes.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenna Myra. I'm the Directing Attorney for Impact Litigation and Policy at Betsedic Legal Services in Los Angeles. Thank you for convening this session focused on the Justice Gap Study, which is so central to this group's work and to the work we're all doing to try to make access to justice a reality for more Californians. Thank you also for the opportunity to share information about the income guidelines for legal services, which I believe was circulated to the working group this morning. I think that relates to the Justice Gap Study as well as to other things, but in a couple of places, the study notes that legal services only or primarily serves people at or below 125% of federal poverty. And we just wanted to make sure that this group understood that that's not accurate. There are lots of sources of funding and grants that allow us to serve folks above that amount, and we regularly do. For Betsedic, what that looks like is about 40% of our clients at any given time are above 125% of federal poverty, and about 70% of those folks are between 125 and 250% of poverty, which, just as a note, the federal poverty guidelines are very low when you use them in most of California. So HUD has more regional specific guidelines. which actually look at the cost of living in an area. And if you look at the HUD guidelines, someone whose household income is 250% of federal poverty is still considered very low income as an LA County resident. So I think that's important to keep in mind and relates to my next comment about the study itself. I think the study is great, but I believe there are a number of areas for further study that we should explore to better identify the obstacles to access to justice and the right solutions. One of those is who can afford to pay for a professional at all, whether that's a paraprofessional or a lawyer. The survey that legal services organizations like BetCedec was asked to fill out did ask us to identify people who were eligible for our services, but who we could not serve due to insufficient resources. But we were not asked about the income of those people who we turned away. Based on all of my time working in legal services, I don't have the data for you, but I feel quite strongly that the vast majority of folks who called us asking for help and were turned away because our legal services resources are insufficient cannot afford to pay a paraprofessional unless that paraprofessional is charging, $10 an hour. These are people who are very low income in Los Angeles County, and they don't have money to spend on a paraprofessional or a lawyer. So I think we need to really look at the income of the households that are looking for legal services and not receiving them. And I think what we will find is that very few of those households can afford to pay a professional. And I think we need to keep that in mind as we design solutions to try to close that gap. The second thing is I didn't see anything in the study that talked about the number of additional advocates, paraprofessionals, or lawyers who would be needed to help to close the access to justice gap. As I'm sure we all know, the state bar did a great thing and lowered the cut score.
Your comments pretty quickly. You've passed your minutes.
I'm almost done. The state bar recently lowered the cut score for the bar exam, which goes into effect with this October's bar exam. We expect that to result in 800 to 1,000 additional lawyers licensed to practice in the state of California every year. I think we need to go back and think again about how those additional lawyers will help to fill some of the gaps that have been identified for the study before we think about licensing a whole new type of professional. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Janet.
Okay, and now we have Lee Farron. Okay, Ms. Farron, as soon as you unmute, you can begin speaking.
Thank you so much. My name is Lee Farron. I'm the Director of Litigation and Pro Bono at the Public Law Center. And we are a nonprofit legal services organization in Southern California. Similar to BetCedec, we provide free civil legal services to low-income residents of Orange County, excuse me, in a variety of substantive law areas. And I think we can all agree that there's a gap, for individuals trying to access justice. That is, I think, without question. I think where we have a question is in which way is the best way to address that gap, correct? So for the legal services intake audit portion of the Justice Gap Study, almost every legal services organization in California provides limited scope services to its clients, and often to a single client multiple times over the course of their case. So for instance, like in a consumer case, we might assist a client with answering a debt collection lawsuit and then close the case, according to the audit, is unable to fully serve because we weren't able to sign on for full representation. However, a month or two later, when that client is served with discovery, they come back to us and we open a case and we assist them with responding to discovery. And when the case gets to trial, we often will sign on for full representation. So I want to be clear that auditing legal services for a 4-week period doesn't actually reflect the level of services that were provided to each individual client. And so I think our suggestion, similar to the individual Justice Gap Study that Jenna spoke about, is really to further investigate what the actual scope of services is that's being provided over a longer period than just a 4-week period, which really is insufficient to follow any kind of a case, honestly, for that short period of time, and to identify where the real gaps in services are, particularly in terms of who legal services are able to provide, able to serve, and where it is that we're really missing out on people and where they're unable to access services. Thank you very much.
Any more?
Yes, there's
Any
a
more
couple
requests?
hands.
Okay.
Stacy Tutt.
I did promote Stacy to be able to speak, but she seems to have disappeared. Well, maybe, oh, hold on, here we go.
I'm terribly sorry. This is actually Claire Johnson-Raba with the University of California Irvine Consumer Law Clinic. I'm accidentally logged in under my colleague's name, so I'm sorry. I'll message you the correct name for the record, and I apologize. I'm a clinical legal instructor at the University of California Irvine Consumer Law Clinic, and I'm also a researcher at UCI. I would like to encourage the Paraprofessionals Working Group to take a step back and engage in additional research around civil court record data before considering licensing an entire category of paraprofessionals to address the justice gap. As my colleagues Jenna Miara and Lee Farron said, the legal services, the legal aid and legal services world has a number of different ways to address the justice gap. My research has indicated that we have a lack of knowledge about a number of the areas that the paraprofessionals are being proposed to address, including consumer debt collection cases. The Judicial Council of California does not even collect in the JIPSA system the number of debt collection cases that are filed, resolved, or the disposition data for those cases in every year. So I would encourage this working group to take a step back and engage with some of the civil court record data that we have and look at what we don't have for the state of California so that we can engage in measurable outcomes for maybe some pilot programs for paraprofessionals rather than embarking on an entirely new licensing scheme with insufficient data to measure the outcomes and the effects on families. Also, as a consumer protection attorney, I, like my colleagues, am also concerned about setting out into the free market a number of paraprofessionals who may have a profit motive to engage in potentially unscrupulous practices, and the harm to consumers may be greater than the good. And so I would encourage this group to step back and engage in a little bit more research before it embarks on any licensing scheme. Thank you.
Okay, and next we have Lauren Klein. If you unmute your mic, you can begin speaking.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. My name is Lauren Klein. I'm with the Legal Aid Association of California. And I just wanted to take a minute to echo the comments that Jenna and Lee and Claire made, and to let the working group know that the things they are speaking of are not unique to their individual organizations. These are things that are true across the board in the legal aid community. I know the topic today is the Justice Gap Study. I particularly wanted to echo Jenna's comments about the income guidelines. And we want to correct any misinformation that you may have received before about who is eligible for legal aid and who is receiving legal aid, as it is indeed people who are above the 125% of poverty. And there are lots of, idiosyncrasies with how each organization provides services that aren't necessarily reflected in the Justice Gap Study itself. All of that being said, I wanted to offer my organization as a resource to the working group. We are happy to present information to you about any of these topics. I am also having regular conversations with folks across the legal aid community and talking to them about the work of your working group, and I'm happy to provide insight from the community at any point.
Great. I think that's it. Is that right, Linda?
Correct.
Okay. So we are going to move on. I just want to briefly give an overview of what we're thinking will be the process for the conversation today. We are joined by Dan Mulatto and Jennifer Benz with NORC at the University of Chicago. And what I wanted to clarify for the working group and for public members listening is that NORC conducted the survey, the AmeriSpeaks panel survey, that formed the basis for the technical report component of the larger Justice Gap Study report. The Justice Gap Study, as we call it, the California Justice Gap Study, included broadly 4 components. The technical report, again, conducted by NORC or completed by NORC. the intake census of legal aid programs, which you heard some of the speakers refer to. The intake census was conducted and the data was analyzed by State Bar staff. And we have a couple of folks, or at least I see Lisa Chavez here on my screen, who will be able to answer questions about that portion of the Justice Gap Study report. Then there was a study of legal services organizations, recruitment and retention practices. That was done really by the Legal Aid Association of California. You heard the last speaker was with LAC in partnership with the State Bar. So that was the third component of the Justice Gap Study. And the last component was on law students and the impact of debt burdens and other factors on students choosing to go into careers in public interest. And that portion of the report was also conducted by State Bar staff. So we call it the Justice Gap Study. It really is comprised of 4 rather distinct sections. We invited NORC to speak to all of you today because of questions that had come up primarily during the last round of subcommittee meetings around the methodology for that technical assistance portion of the report. That's where we talk about the gap between those who need legal services and those who get legal services, not necessarily from legal aid, but through any means. And so we invited NORC here to answer your questions about the methodology really of the technical report that is the one component of the broader Justice Gap Study. As I mentioned, we also do have State Bar staff here who are able to speak to the intake census portion of the report. I do want to caution with respect to both components, we may not be able to answer all questions today. And certainly you've heard in public comment a desire for additional data analysis and study. I am confident that we will, by the end of this call meeting, of many such requests. So we'll be documenting those and kind of going back and doing a feasibility assessment as related to additional study needs. We have sent Dan and Jennifer the questions that you all had come up with. And so what we intend to do now is just take the questions sequentially. Some of them NORC is going to answer, some we're going to turn over to State Bar staff to address. But this is intended to be a dialogue. So please feel free to working group members to ask questions. It would be helpful for you to use the raise hand icon to do so, but feel free to ask questions as Dan, Jennifer, or State Bar staff are presenting. And with that, I will turn it over to Dan. Jennifer, welcome. Thank you.
And I just asked, would it be helpful if I share on the screen that shows the questions as we were discussing them, or does everybody have them already?
Helpful, I think, just to provide, where we are on the list, or if someone wants to just read the question and then I can go over the answer we have prepared for it, whatever works for you.
So if this is helpful, we can just have this. Does that work?
Yes, sure.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I will just do a brief introduction. I'm Dan Milano. I was the lead analyst on the report in the survey, so I'm going to handle many of the questions here. So I guess we'll just start at the top. I'll just kind of preface this by saying, what we did with this was mostly just try to match the national study as a point of comparison as much as possible. So that relates to how the questions were asked, the definitions in the report, and the income cuts that guided the analysis. So a lot of my answers are going to kind of reference that, but I think a lot of you understand that already. So, so for the first question, what we saw was that, so in this part of the report, we look at things at the problem level. So that means we have our rates are out of the total problems that we asked about, not out of people. So what we did find was that, yes, 68%, for 68% of the problems, individuals did not make any attempt at legal help. and we found that even fewer sought help from an attorney. Just 24% of the problems that received any legal help got legal help from a paid attorney, and 19% received help from a volunteer attorney. Okay, should I just keep going on the list, or?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, so then the next question, for problems which respondents didn't seek legal help, we looked at the reasons they gave for not seeking help for each problem. So again, looking at the problems that didn't seek and receive legal help, for 31% of problems, they decided to just deal with it without any help. For 31%, they weren't sure if it was a legal issue. For 14%, they were afraid to pursue legal action. For 16%, they were worried about cost. And for 15%, they didn't know where to look. Concerns about cost were higher for those under or at or below the 125% of federal poverty level. I know we are interested in doing potentially other analysis of income levels there, but that's what we have in the report. So I just wanted to note that. And I guess we would defer to State Bar for any implications of these numbers. We don't want to suggest whether more lawyers would help on the issue. We don't have that specifically in the survey. Okay. So question 3.
I have a hand raised, Dan. Carolyn?
Okay.
Thanks, and I don't know if you can see me or not, but yeah, my question, I guess, is when you say things like about what you had and what you, first of all, when you say the national study, that's the 2017 legal services study that was done for the Legal Services Corporation?
Yeah, that's right. It's that study.
Okay. And I haven't gone to track the definitions, but the definitions should match of each of the categories. And that was your task, to match each of the definitions to what the California study did.
Yes, the survey was nearly identical. I think we added a couple of questions about problems related to immigration, but otherwise it was basically an exact replica. Okay.
And I think I just wanted to clarify too, and some of my questions are down below, so I won't ask those yet. But when you talk about the distinction between, and Leah mentioned this, what you did and what the State Bar did, can you clarify where your job ended and where theirs picked up?
We're responsible for the household survey, so that is I guess questions about why people did or did not seek legal help and the percentage of problems they experienced that did or did not receive legal help. I guess they can speak more to the intake survey, but I think those are just, that's based on people that came in that someone talked to in person. Is that right? I
guess what my question is, did you collect data? Did you collect the data and then send the data set to the State Bar, or did you go a little farther? I've read the technical report, and I didn't know Leah, I didn't know who wrote it until today. So what did you deliver to the State Bar? Where did you go? Hey, here's the packet, and did it work that way? Let's go and know so we know how to direct our questions.
Yeah, we did most of the analysis of the data with State Bar, and we worked together to write that report for them.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
I have another hand up, Stephen Fleischman.
Hi, Dan. My question was number 2, and I just wanted to clarify what I think I heard you say was really the Justice Gap study doesn't answer that question. Do I have that right? Do I have that wrong? Tell me.
That's more of an intake census question.
I'm sorry, you cut in and out. Could you start your answer over?
Yeah, I would say that is answered more by the intake census. I would say ours is based more on reasons people did not, reasons people didn't seek legal help in the first place, and that we didn't ask any questions about whether there was insufficient attorneys to meet their needs. No.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it's the intake census. I think this is not a question. There's no empirical evidence that having more lawyers would reduce the number of people who made no effort to contact a lawyer. We didn't get that from the technical report that NORC produced or the intake census. The intake census is people who did attempt to get served through legal aid organizations. So that is not the group that you're referring to in question 2. And the questions that were asked by NORC did not get at that issue. We don't have it.
Thank you, Leah. Yeah. Thank you, Dan.
I think, sure, and I think question 3, which I'm getting to here, kind of speaks to this, where, you know, we asked how many people attempted to find a lawyer but couldn't. And part of it is our definition of receiving legal help is pretty broad. What we said was if you looked online for legal help or if you reached out to someone for legal help, that counted as seeking and receiving legal help. So yeah, that's part of why we can't speak to that point as much here. So I think that kind of answers question 3A. We don't have, we find that 1% of people sought legal help but couldn't receive it, but I think that's because we have a fairly broad definition of receiving legal help. Sorry, I gotta switch headphones.
Just to follow up on that, the reason that definition was used was because of the goal that Carolyn referenced to mirror the methodology that LSC employed. I think that is not necessarily a weakness. That was a valid motivation at that time, but we're seeing now that this is causing an issue, right? Because when you so broadly define getting legal help to the point where it becomes not that useful, it's not what we as the working group would define as getting legal help. So as you all think about additional data analyses that we might need, I think this is clearly an area for further analysis. Go ahead, Dan. I don't see any other hands.
Okay, so question 3B, how many contacted a lawyer but were told they did not have a good case? We did not ask about that, so we can't speak to that. Question 3C, specifics as related to consumer debt issues. So in our report, we referred to these as financial issues. So anything you see in the public report or the technical report that talks about finances, that's kind of how we categorized it there. What we found is that Californians sought and received legal help for 29% of problems related to finance that impacted them. And we found that this rate was similar for those above and below 125% of the federal poverty level. And it is possible for us to look into reasons people didn't seek legal help for their financial problems, but we do not have that analysis on hand at the moment. But it is possible to look into that, if that is something that's of interest in particular.
Erin, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so I have a question about, do you know the income levels and the breakdown of that for the folks that were not able to get legal help, either through legal aid or through some other means?
Let me look at the report. So this is just between, I mean, we're going to get into some differences in income by income a little later at a little more granular of a level. Maybe we can hold that question until then. Does that seem okay? Or should we move forward with the table we were talking about yesterday, Linda?
I think you can.
Doesn't matter to me.
I think you can show
Okay.
the table now. I think Linda will need to stop screen sharing.
Okay, I can share my screen. Open system preferences. Sorry about that. It's making me, so my Zoom settings, it's making me quit Zoom to update my settings to share my screen. Linda, do you happen to have that offhand since I sent that to you yesterday, or?
Did you? I don't think that you sent this to me, but if you email it to me, I can pull it up really quickly.
Okay, let me do that. Sorry about that. Okay, I just sent it to you.
Okay.
Okay, so we did some high-level analysis of, I guess this is 8 different income brackets here by.
Sorry, can you make it bigger?
Yeah.
Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, we did some analysis by these 8 income brackets based on federal poverty level. This accounts for income and household size. So we have this nice little table here for you. I can kind of provide some of our high level findings. I guess to your first question, the percent of problems that received legal help, you can kind of see that starting at the 400% and above level is where we see a bit of a bump in the percent of problems that received legal help. That seems to be a cut point here, but everyone, those below that level were less likely to receive legal help compared to those above that level. Yeah, that row right there.
I'm showing here.
Yes, so some of the samples above that level in the individual columns are a little small, but looking at it in the aggregate, we have a little more statistical power there to make that comparison. But we do find that those below are less likely to receive legal help. They're also more likely to, looking at the top row, they're also more likely to experience more legal problems, especially those in that bottom bracket. They experience an average of 5.6 problems in their household in the past year, whereas those 600% and above experience just 1.1. The row below that looks at percent that received any legal help for any problem they experienced. So this is at the person level. So a person who had one problem and received help for it would count as receiving legal help. A person that had 50 problems and received help for one of them would count as receiving legal help. So this doesn't account for the number of problems, but again, we see that those above 400% were more likely to receive help of any kind for any of their problems. So then looking at that fourth row, we look at the adequacy of help, and we find kind of a similar split. Those are above 400% were more likely to receive adequate help. So that's kind of what we've looked at so far in terms of a little more granular income analysis. We have a lot more in the report just based on that over under 125% of the poverty level cut, but this is kind of where we started looking at it in more detail.
Does that answer your question, Sharon, or?
I'm actually Yeah, just to go back to one of the public comments of one of the legal aid folks that said that anecdotally, a lot of the folks that she's turning away are very, very low income. And I'm looking at, sorry, I'm like going back to the screen to that very bottom row where you have like, I'm sorry, I don't have the screen up anymore.
Again, Linda. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I was just looking at that. Where I was looking at the 86% and the 86% of those very low levels of percentages of problems that receive no or adequate help. Now, assuming that those are appropriate for an attorney or for a paraprofessional, I'm wondering how many of those folks who are very, very low income could actually afford a paraprofessional, and if that's the answer to this particular data point.
I don't think that's a question for NORC, but I do think it's important to come back to the impetus for the paraprofessional program is not to substitute for legal services. So I think there's sort of this information now coming forward about this higher income range that legal services organizations serve. I'm hoping we can actually put that on the agenda for our October 29th meeting, because I do understand that programs that receive a pro bono allocation from us, which is about 27% of our programs, can use the HUD eligibility guideline, which is higher. And that might take you up to the 400% in some metro areas in California. So regardless, the paraprofessional program is not intended to substitute for legal services. The thought is it's for folks who would not qualify for legal services.
Right,
So,
but it's also supposed to address the justice gap. That's sort of the impetus that we've been reading this report and talking a lot about that. And if a large portion of this justice gap are folks that are very, very low income, whether it's in this committee or another committee, that needs to be addressed.
right, but you can see that the percent of problems that receive no or inadequate legal help, it ranges from between 74 to 86% of problems, with 78% of problems for those at 600% of poverty or below. We're seeing your email now, Linda. 78% of problems for those at 600% of FPL or above receiving no or inadequate legal help. So we can also add the numbers of Californians that fall in each of these categories, but I think it's fair to say there are millions of Californians in these far right bars who are experiencing the same types of problems.
So I think that we just have to be clear as we're doing the work, what the scope of the work is and who we're targeting.
Okay, let me see if there are any other hands up. Oh, yes. I think for Reba and then Carolyn.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to ask you about the significance of the use of the word respondents in the second row. Is that particularly referring to respondents in a case as opposed to petitioners? You know.
Sorry, yeah, I guess that's a survey term. So that's the people who answered the survey. I guess it is different in the legal context, but I was trying to differentiate between at the person level versus the problem level. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Sorry, coming from a legal world, I guess I'm one way to look at things. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, Carolyn.
Okay, so all right. My question is later, but this might be a better time to raise it because you've got my question is 6 and we're on 4. But this table, I know I saw this table. Is this, I was going back trying to find it here. It's not in, I don't think it's in the published technical report, but could you, I'm so sorry, rather than having to go through all the pieces parts, which, do you know, or Leah, maybe you know where this comes from? This was not generated for this talk. This is part of what was published.
I don't know if this was published, but we had conducted this in the past and provided it to State Bar. So they might have shared it with others.
Okay.
There's some components of it that are in the report, Carolyn. I don't think this exact table is in any iteration of the report, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, there's all those footnotes, and I swear to gosh, I remembered going through this. But okay, my questions are in the survey, and I read the data in the survey. It asks things like 1 to 5, strongly, not so strongly, neutral, that kind of 1 to 5 continuous data. When you have a table like this that has the 85, 86%, what are you, this is a fancy word I read somewhere on a website. Are you dichotomizing this? What parts of those 1 to 5 questions are you combining into that total answer in one of these columns?
So yeah, like you said, this is a dichotomized. So you either received no adequate legal help, or you received no or inadequate legal help. So yeah, like you said, so as you'll see, like those 2 rows all add up to 100 when you look at them together. So what we did for this was in the report we detail how we define legal help, and it was if they said they look for it online or talk to a professional. And then for defining adequate legal help, we asked, do you think you have or will be able to get as much help as you need? Yes or no? If they said no, that meant it was inadequate help. Okay,
so in this particular table, it's not dichotomized, it's broken out. A 1 would be the least, and a 2 would be the, the kind of, sorta, and the 3 would be...
For these, there was no kind of, sorta. It was just yes or no.
Okay, so these are all yes or no. Okay, great.
Help or not, yeah.
Okay, and I assume this is published because there's all those footnotes, so I don't know if Leah can help me find it again. And so when there were, okay, did you ever dichotomize data in some of those charts? Did you ever combine those? If you did, but just, if you did you leave out the neutral part?
Well, I think it depends on the question. We would have to kind of, if you could point me to a specific question, I'd be happy to answer that. But yeah, a lot of the times we did collapse categories, and just for, to make the data more useful. I mean, if you ask a 5-part question, it gets pretty muddled if you look at each individual line. So we collapse categories. I know the one question that was provided to us, you asked, I don't know if it was you, but someone asked how we defined being impacted by the problem. And it was, the way we did define it was if they were affected slightly or more, they were asked the follow-ups. If they said they weren't impacted at all, they were not asked the follow-ups. So that's how we defined it, impacted by their problem.
Okay.
Can't find that on the list of questions, but yeah, that is one instance where we collapse categories together.
Okay. Did you use SAS for this? Are you a SAS,
yes.
SAS or an R person? You're a SAS person. Okay, I saw the problem.
I'm not an R person, unfortunately.
Okay. All right, that's what I got for now.
Okay, Sharon, is your hand raised again, or?
No, it's not.
Okay, so, oh, Ira's hand is up.
In the people who said they did not get adequate help, got inadequate help, it just occurred to me when you were explaining what that answer meant. What did you say? That they didn't get all the help they needed. Now, I think I'm remembering that right. If somebody got a lawyer, I'm looking especially at well, it doesn't matter. If somebody got a lawyer and the lawyer represented them all the way through a case, but the case turned out badly, in their view, in the view of the respondent, is it possible they could have answered, no, I got inadequate legal help?
Well, we tried to define this as specifically as possible. The exact question was, were you able to get as much legal help with this issue as you felt you needed? So we were specific in terms of saying it was legal help. And we asked a different question about, were you satisfied with the legal help you were provided? So we would look at that as saying the second question is more about, were you happy with how your legal help performed? And we think that this question was pretty strongly focused on, you know, the actual amount of help. You weren't just left, you know, if they saw the case to the end. But I mean, like with a survey, there's always the potential for some measurement error with people reading questions differently. But we think this was a pretty good question at tapping at what we wanted.
Right. It occurs to me that people might have, you know, I can't count the number of times when people said, how did your lawyer do? Well, they didn't do this and they didn't do that. No, I didn't get the help I needed. I didn't get all the help. So I think it's possible.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up. Maybe Linda, we can go back to the questions.
I think we were on number 4.
Yes.
Okay, so for that one, yeah, that's correct. 50% of problems were considered resolved as opposed to ongoing. So the way we asked this was your problem resolved and no longer ongoing, ongoing and no longer dealing with it, or ongoing and still dealing with it? So 50% of folks said their problem was resolved and no longer ongoing. We found that rates of resolution were similar for those where legal help was received and not received. So that doesn't mean a legal resolution, it just means the problem is over.
Okay, I don't see any hands up.
Okay. Number 5, we did not ask that question. Number 6. So the first question was, I presume that when the report says severely, only that data is reported. That is correct. The follow-up in the bullet, that is also correct. It includes those who said slightly, moderately, very much, or severely. The number 7. So this was, rewards are the small monetary incentive that we provide our panelists who did the survey for us. So we call these AmeriSpeak points for our AmeriSpeak panel, and we refer to them as rewards in our recruiting materials. Okay. So this next question, we kind of,
I think we
at
have,
least okay, go ahead, sorry.
Sharon had a question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering why you only conducted this in English and Spanish. I mean, I know that those are like the largest numbers. You have the largest numbers within those languages, but California is quite diverse and you have a lot of other pockets of low income populations that you missed. So just wondering about methodology there.
Yeah, some of that it was to match the national survey's approach. And some of that was also just a feasibility question. When we move beyond Spanish, we often find that we have a hard time then deciding which languages to include. It seems like there are like a host of languages we could add from there, and maybe State Bar can speak to what they were interested in with this decision. But I think it gets kind of difficult beyond that, and especially on our panel, we don't have a ton of folks that we have flagged as speaking a different language besides those.
Yeah, so I think it's important, maybe Dan, you can briefly describe the panel, but these are panels that NORC has established all over the country. And so you can create the samples that you're looking for. So for instance, for the Justice Gap study, we oversampled, I think 125% and under. We wanted to make sure that we got urban and rural distinctions using, I think, MSA definitions. So there were all kinds of different factors we were trying to take into account. And my understanding is NORC only maintains panels in English and Spanish, or at least in California. We did ask about other languages, particularly several different Asian languages. And we did at one point identify that as a phase 2 Justice Gap study for California to try to get at not just the other top 5 non-English languages spoken in California, but also trying to look at issues unique to Native American communities in California. That was going to be phase 2. I think it was going to be done this year. And I believe that has been postponed, but through NORC, we were only able to do English and Spanish.
Yeah, that's right. The way we've done our recruiting for the panel has been focused on English and Spanish.
Yeah, and I guess
So
just a
someone
follow-up
who's
question.
exclusively a speaker of a different language probably would not be included.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was also like a follow-up question. I was really curious to, I guess, to see that the 2 issues that bubbled to the surface were finance and employment. And then for legal aid, it was different. It was housing and immigration. And I'm wondering, with your particular survey, I'm assuming that this took place in 2018, 2019, a time where there was a lot of immigration activity. How many people felt comfortable in disclosing that immigration was an issue for them? And if that was an issue that you faced? Because I'm really surprised that that issue didn't come up more in your particular work with this.
Yeah, there's always a chance that when you're asking sensitive questions that people are afraid to divulge that. And we did a lot of this over the web, so we hope that tends to minimize that kind of, I guess what we refer to as social desirability responding, because it's a little more anonymous. You're not speaking to another person. We also, perhaps, I mean, each of these categories was kind of a composite of asking about several individual problems. And we only asked about 2 specific immigration issues. Those 2 were just help needing to fill out paperwork or legal documents referring to U.S. immigration, or attending court or other legal actions related to U.S. immigration. So perhaps those were just not as comprehensive of a list as other topics, but we thought those were the key issues to get at. That's about all I can speak to on that.
Okay, I don't see any other hand raised. This question 8, I think, is one that we've talked about a little bit. Do you, Lisa, have anything to add here?
I don't.
Okay. So as I mentioned before, you know, we've gotten this memo from, I think, Public Law Center, which we shared out to the working group today. I've gotten some more information from the Office of Legal Services staff about the 75% HUD guideline, which my understanding is applies to those 27%, 26% of programs that are receiving a pro bono allocation. I think it's best, you know, if we plan to try to agendize this whole issue of who legal services organizations are actually serving, perhaps for the October 29th meeting, if this is an avenue that the working group continues to want to explore. Then the answer to 8B is it will impact One of the public commenters said there was no analysis done of the number of new attorneys needed, but there was. We did an analysis based on the 125% that we would need about 9,000 more attorneys to serve that 125%. So if you're moving the income eligibility scale up for legal services, that 9,000 number of new attorneys needed would only grow. So that's an analysis we can do, but we haven't done it for today. Carolyn?
Hey, Leah, just real quick, did we skip 7 about what people get for being a part of the study group?
Yeah, Dan mentioned that. It's not for participating in this particular study, but for serving on the panel, I think. Or go ahead, Dan.
No, yeah, we offer a small monetary equivalent of AmeriPoints for each panelist who completes each survey. So I think it ranges from $2 to $5 typically, or at least the equivalent of AmeriPoints that they accumulate and then they can use on our to purchase a variety of things. So yeah, this is they received a small payment for completing this survey, and we call those rewards in our recruiting materials.
Okay. I think we can go on to number 9.
Okay. So yeah, this is, we're not going to speak to where the effort should be focused, but this is correct. 15% of problems where legal help was not sought, our respondents did not seek legal help because they were worried about cost. These people didn't even speak to a legal professional, so they were concerned about cost without necessarily knowing what the cost would be. Any follow-ups on that?
I'm sorry, Dan, did you confirm the 15%? Okay.
Yeah, it was 15%.
All right.
I think it was 21% among those below 125% of the federal poverty level. So it was a little higher.
Okay.
Okay, so 9A, the study found that 16% of problems that received legal help among those 125% of federal poverty level and below received that help at a self-help center at court. But we didn't dive into any particulars about that help. 9B. So this is kind of asking about future analysis we could do or future study. What we were thinking, one potential thing we could do is look into message testing, using like an experimental approach to better understand what types of languages and messages like can reach out and activate people who need help. So one way we could tackle this is that we would present our survey respondents with different messages that would inform them of their options, and then ask them in both an implicit and an explicit way how they might see, whether or not they might seek help in the future and in what ways they would seek that help. So that's just one idea. So C, 9C, I think we can maybe defer to State Bar on what things stuck out to them on that, since they have more the subject matter expertise.
I don't think we have anything to add. I mean, we talked about this whole issue of people not knowing that they had a legal problem. I think that's a huge issue to understand, perhaps why the existing market infrastructure has not been able to address that. It's just the whole supply and demand economics would seem to suggest that marketing would have been developed to address that issue, but apparently it has not. So I think that's certainly an area to explore.
Okay, I think the next few questions are about the intake census.
Okay. Lisa, are these ones that you're wanting to speak to or able to speak to?
Yes. So, hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Chavez. I'm the director of the Office of Research and Institutional Accountability. And yes, so question 10 and 10A refers to the intake census. And let's start with the first question. How many additional legal service advocates would be needed to meet the needs of the 27% of clients who were not served due to insufficient resources? This is an analysis that we can explore doing. We did this analysis based on results yielded from the household survey that NORC conducted. So this would be a totally different analysis, and I could see whether or not we could use that same methodology and apply it to this. So we can add it to our list of analyses to consider in the future. With regard to 10A, what other options for expanded legal services, their impact have been or should be studied? I don't have an answer to that. It's more of a qualitative piece. And with regards to the question, or rather, I kind of interpret this as pointing out that the intake census asked the organizations to track all the people that approached them over 1 month and report to the state bar. Out of all these people, how many were you able to fully serve, and how many were you unable to fully serve, and give the reasons due to insufficient resources, and give the reasons why. So the point is that someone has made the point that when you do this only over 1 month, there's the concern that we may miss people, so who may have been served at that point during 1 month, categorized as unable to serve fully, but then that person came back 2 months later and they were able to finish off serving them and give them additional resources. But my understanding of the direction that the State Bar gave to these organizations, which is to tell us, based on your analysis of this person or this case, given your resources right now, are you going to be able to fully serve them to resolve the problem? And if you know, in the methodology section, there is a category that says pending, which means that at that time during that month when they filled out this survey for us, or rather the census, they were not yet sure if they were going to be able to fully serve them. Or rather, if they were going to be able to give them all the services they needed to resolve the problem. So I personally think that this captures, addresses this critique, but we could review it again. Review those. It would involve reviewing the directions that we gave to the organizations more closely, and maybe even following up with them and see how they interpreted it. Does anyone have any questions about that?
I think that would be really helpful, because I know, coming from legal aid, that relationships with clients are often long, and sometimes they come in spurts, and you help them with something limited scope. And then, maybe if you capture that person with a study, you would say, like, we didn't fully serve them, but then the person comes back and then you do more work for them. So I would look at how the question was interpreted, because that's just the nature of how the work is done oftentimes.
Okay. Question 11 is this, Dan, were you going to speak to this? There was no intention for these studies to be comparable.
Right.
Sorry, I was on mute. I think you guys were saying you were going to speak to it more, but like you said, yeah, there was no intention for them to be the same. We could work to define our categories in a way that more closely matches the intake census, if that is important. But I think that's about all we have on that.
So the methodology for both the household survey or NRC's work and the intake census, they both mirrored the LSC methodology. LSC had those two components. We had 4 components of our justice gap study. LSC had 2. We mirrored LSC's methodology for both because of a desire to be able to compare the results to LSC's results. So that was the desired comparator, not the household survey to the intake census. I see Carolyn's hand is up.
Yeah, super quick question about that. I don't see the intake study in the data. Maybe I missed it from the download. I've got, is that on the public file? I've got household, personal, respondent. I think there was one other survey instrument. I don't see a collection of the data that says intake.
We didn't handle that data on our side. Did you guys? I'm not sure if that was on the website.
Yeah, did that data get uploaded to the website, Lisa? Do you know?
I don't believe we uploaded the intake data to the State Bar website.
That would be great. Of course, no identifying factors, and maybe that's a problem why you couldn't or didn't. But yeah, that would be really interesting, especially as it pertains to the other chart. If I saw it, I apologize if it's up there. But yeah, if you could do that, that'd be great.
Yeah, we'll look into it. And I apologize, I have to jump off. So Linda is going to take over facilitating. And I hope that you're able to leave a little bit of time at the end to brainstorm and identify all of the additional research questions that you have, because again, we'll convene as a team, talk with Donna and others at the State Bar about feasibility and try to move forward with as many of the requests that you make. Okay, thank you.
People ready for question 12 now?
Okay. Yeah, I think listening to the feedback here, we think there's probably room here to dive a little more into the process of when someone does reach out to a legal professional and what happens then. We could limit the definition of legal help to get more at those who go to a legal professional, or not necessarily limit the definition, but look more into those who go to a legal professional, but then the legal professional doesn't actually address their problem. There may be more people out there who are going to them and not really receiving much help. I mean, we have the question about the adequacy of help, but I think we can get at more why help might have felt inadequate. We can also ask whether people are being turned away, whether they are told the cost and then decide not to use it, not to pursue legal help then, or other potential situations that might kind of come at that point between contact and then resolution or deciding to pursue it or not.
Okay. Oh, it looks like Sharon has a question, a follow-up question on that one.
Yeah, I think just on that point and to some themes that we've heard today, what about work on the front end to educate folks who don't necessarily realize that they have a legal problem, or maybe they do, but they don't realize that there are free legal services out there? Have you done any thinking about solutions to that? Because that seems to be embedded in that 68%.
I think that is one of the questions later on that was included.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. sorry, skipping ahead.
Okay. If we go to number 13.
Yeah, so the survey asked if people were satisfied with the way the problem had been resolved. We did not ask specifically about satisfaction with their legal help, but yeah, that's kind of what I was speaking to in the question before. Another way we could dive into the process of getting help would be to ask about their satisfaction with the process.
14 then? Sharon, is that your hand is still raised from before, or did you?
Yeah, still raised from before.
Okay. So number 14.
Because I think we've kind of gotten at this one in other places, but we asked respondents why they did not seek legal help for an issue and found that for 31% of their problems, they were not sure if it was a legal issue. 14% were afraid to pursue legal action, and 15% didn't know where to look. So I think that speaks to a potential for consumer education.
Okay.
So for 15, I can just kind of read the question that we used for this. I've referenced it in other places, but for each problem the respondents experience, we asked, why haven't you talked to a legal professional about this issue? And then one of the responses was that they could select was, I wasn't sure if this was a legal issue or not. So this was part of a battery of response options. They could check any that applied to them. Some of the other ones were, I didn't know where to look for help. I was worried about how much it might cost to get legal help. I just decided to deal with the problem without help. I was afraid to pursue legal action. I haven't had time, or some other reason. So that was left up to the respondent to decide what types of issues were identified that way. But that's how we define. They were presented with that question. They could respond whether they were uncertain if it was a legal issue. Then finally, I think this is also a question about the intake census, if Lisa wants to speak to this one.
Hold on. Sorry, number 16. No, they were not. That information was not collected for the unable to serve the particular legal problems topics.
So I think we've gone through all the questions, and I want to just take a few minutes to just compile all of the different additional survey data requests that people have, as Lisa said, so that we can review them and see what's feasible to do for additional research. So maybe we can just go ahead and start. People can raise their hands, and I can take notes. And Araya, if you could help me by calling on the people, and so that I can take notes on what the questions are.
Of course.
Thank you.
I'm a panelist, but I don't see any hands. Okay.
Yes, there are a couple of hands raised.
Yeah,
Sure.
I have Amos
Oh, I see it.
Hartson and Stephen Fleischman. So Amos, if you want to go ahead.
Gotcha.
Sure. So one of the things I think would be helpful, to the extent we are going to have on the agenda for the October meeting more information about the income guidelines of legal services, and maybe some additional data points, rerunning the data with different income guidelines. I think it would be helpful, if possible, to also break that down by practice area or topics. One of the ways this working group is using the Justice Gap Study is to try to identify practice areas that are most important or to prioritize practice areas for a potential paraprofessional program. And we cast the net broadly based on the justice gap. And I think we have working groups that are subgroups that are maybe narrowing that a bit, but I think it would be helpful if you're doing that analysis to do it not just by income, but also by topic or practice area, if that's possible.
So you're saying to take the data that we have from the Justice Gap, the household survey that NORC did, and try to do the analysis based on an area of law, as well as the higher income levels, the more stratified.
Right. So, exactly. So I think what we have decided to do is agendize for the October meeting a little bit more data crunching and analysis,
right,
not just at the 125% of poverty level, but use higher income levels to reflect that legal services is not just limited to the 125% income level. But I think in addition to that, combined with that, I think it would help, if it's possible, to separate it among the practice areas or topics to see if there's a difference, for example, in family law versus consumer law versus housing law, if there's a different metric for the above and below, what qualifies in legal services and what doesn't.
Okay.
I also have Stephen Fleischman next.
Yeah, Linda, I think as part of the agenda, we should include the bigger picture of, do we have enough data now based on the Justice Gap study to go forward at all with any recommendations, or should the State Bar commission another study and reconvene the paraprofessional group after that? I mean, we all seem to be proceeding on the assumption that there's a justice gap and adding more paraprofessionals will close that justice gap, but the data doesn't seem to be there, at least for the 68% of people who don't even try to find an attorney, which I would characterize as more of an education gap. So I think we should put that subject on the agenda, but specifically questions. I think the answer is we don't have answers to questions 2, 3, and 5 on the list.
Yeah, I think that is part of why I'm asking for the practice areas too, because I think most people, especially in legal services, would agree there is a justice gap. And this survey is not the only place to identify the significant justice gap in California for extremely low income, but also moderate income. But the question is, do we have information? For me, the question is, do we have information from the Justice Gap study to identify particular practice areas where that, paraprofessionals are most needed? So I think they're related questions, although I don't know that the survey questions whether or not there is a justice gap at all in California. I think there's a lot of data about the need for additional resources, both to fund legal services and for those people who because of inadequate funding or other restrictions on legal services are not able to get a legal services attorney for free. The justice gap is beyond that. And in addition, there is also this information gap that a lot of people don't even realize that there's a legal problem. The question I think we've been using the justice gap for in many of our conversations is trying to identify practice areas in particular where there is this gap for people, particularly above or below, any certain income guideline.
Amos, I certainly agree with you on the funding issue and on the education issue.
I agree as well, because I think if we're talking about 68% that are not going to any attorneys right now, is there another solution in addition to this or in lieu of this that addresses the justice gap from that angle? And maybe it's a public education campaign, because who's to say that those 68% would be served by a paraprofessional?
Right, and to the extent it's below the within the income guidelines for legal services, additional funding for legal services certainly is an important solution to that problem as well.
Absolutely.
We have a couple of other people with hands up who might have ideas of additional data. So maybe we can, because we are coming pretty close to the end.
Yes, Carolyn's hand is up next.
Okay, yeah, so yeah, I wanted to kind of tag along what I asked earlier about the combining of data. And we had a limited amount of time to really kind of focus the specific questions. So I'm going to look, and I don't know if, again, Leah, I want just specific pieces out of I don't know. The one I was concerned about in July was employment, and there were a couple of tables. But if I could just kind of reserve my right to pick 3 or 4 little tables and go, was this one of the ones that was combined or not? But I really appreciate, this is a lot of work. This is a lot of stuff that you had to compile, and I really appreciate all your hard work.
So if you have specific questions about the data, perhaps I can go ahead and pass that on to Dan, if that's going to be all right, about the data that's already done. But I think right now we want to a certain extent, we want to see if there are other areas of research that the working group would like us to pursue. And it looks like Ira, maybe you have a suggestion?
Kind of. I do. I heard an idea that maybe we need more studying to see if there really is a justice gap. So, but my area of research is to ask right now or later our working group, if there's anybody in the working group who thinks that it's possible that there is no justice gap.
I wouldn't mind commenting on that, but before we wrap up, but are there any more questions though from the group? Linda, anybody else?
Nope, there was nobody else.
Well, first I just want to thank everybody for all the work, Dan and Jennifer and Lisa. But I think the other thing we just have to keep in mind is that, you know, we're still in a pandemic. I still think it's really a state of emergency, especially for low-income communities that need these services like immediately, and are going to need them for the next year or however long it's going to take to recovery. And, you know, I know we need to study more, but part of me is like, we need to try something. We need to try things quickly, right? To get legal services out there. We just did a big COVID testing and research this past weekend with UCSF in Oakland, and almost 2,000 people came through. And it was, you know, we had a lot of services there too, but one of the things that kept coming up were questions around, do I have to pay my rent? What happens if I don't pay my rent? And employment questions, right? And a lot of them are legal services. So we had, so we're connecting folks to legal services that they need, whether it's through organizations, legal aid, or whatever else. But I just think there's this enormous opportunity to get help out in the communities, primarily low-income communities, Black and brown communities, all around the state that are going to need help, that need help right now and are going to need help over the foreseeable future. So here's an opportunity where I would just rather take a little risk and try something, right? Just let's see if we could just try something. And I'm going to push the other trustees to start thinking like that too. So I think there's the urgency of what you guys are doing and your leadership on this particular group is really going to be vital, I think, over the coming months. So I'll just throw that out. But thank you guys.
I agree with that.
Thank you, Chris. So if there are no other questions or comments, Chris, are you ready to adjourn the meeting?
Yeah, I don't see any other hands raised.
Thanks, Soraya. Yeah, I think we're ready to adjourn, and thank everybody very much for your participation, and look forward to seeing you in a few weeks.
And thanks, Dan and Jenny, for joining us and being available to help answer all of our questions.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right.
Thank
you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.